year 1750 in the city of Kaskaskia, Illinois. Bet you never heard of that town. A priest wrote about an animal that is an urban predator that turns out is a very common occurrence for Americans. Most predators disappear when humans move in. Forest turns into neighborhoods, and whatever was living there either retreats deeper into the wild or it dies off completely. That's the pattern people have come to expect. Expansion pushes everything else out. Remember the priest I just told you about? Well, he spoke of a wolf, smaller and less aggressive than the wolves in Europe. In reality, that wasn't a wolf, my friends. It's the American jackal, also known as the coyote. And that's exactly why so many people dismiss it. Because when people think of coyotes, they don't think of neighborhoods, right? They don't think of city streets or backyards or a quiet space between houses at night. They think of open plains, deserts, empty stretches of land far away from where people live. Background noise in the distance. Something you might hear, yes, but almost never see. Coyotes aren't supposed to be here. They're not supposed to be moving through suburban neighborhoods like they belong there. They're not supposed to be showing up on security cameras in the middle of the night, slipping between parked cars and fences like they've memorized the layout. And they're definitely not supposed to be this close to people without being noticed. But they are. And the reason most people don't take it seriously is because the word coyote, it doesn't sound threatening. It sounds small, manageable, familiar. Not something that could adapt, learn, and quietly move into the environments that were never meant for it. That assumption is exactly what makes this so easy to miss. Because what's happening isn't just that coyotes are showing up in cities. No. It's how they're doing it. They're not wandering in by accident. They're not lost or desperate or confused. No, they're moving with purpose. Timing their movement, avoiding people without leaving the area, learning when it's safe to move and when it's not. And once you start to understand that, it changes the way you see every quiet street at night. Because the question isn't whether coyotes are out there, it's how often they've been right there, like right in front of you, right on the side of you, right next to you, very close to you, without you even knowing.
Do you guys ever feel like you're being followed when you're taking your dog for a walk? Yeah, me too. Come on. Hello, little coyote running right at me. You want to be friends? Do you want to be friends with my dog? Do you feel danger? You do. It's okay. Goodbye. Ooh, I can't even see you anymore and you're right there. Look.
Oh, binigyan pa ng... Oh, kita mo.
There's a fox!
No, it's coyote. Mukhang aso.
Yeah, pero coyote yan. Sino mo naman yung buntot yan, oh?
I see coyote!
Dapat takutin nila yan.
For most of modern history, coyotes weren't something people thought much about. They did exist, but at a distance. Out in the open plains, the deserts, the wide stretches of lands where human presence was limited and the rules were different. If you saw one, it was usually from far away. A quick movement across a field, a silhouette across the horizon, gone as quickly as it appeared. They weren't the dominant predator, not even close. In much of North America, that role belonged to wolves. Larger, stronger, more organized. Wolves controlled territory in a way coyotes just couldn't. They dictated movement, access to land, and where smaller predators could exist. And for the most part, coyotes stayed in their place. They adapted to survive on the edges, hunting smaller prey, avoiding direct competition, keeping their distance from anything that could overpower them. They were survivors, but they were limited, and they behaved like it. Coyotes were cautious, right? They avoided humans whenever possible. They moved through open spaces where they could see danger coming, where escape was almost always an option. They didn't take unnecessary risks. They didn't push into areas they didn't know or understand. If humans expanded into an area, coyotes typically pulled back. That was the natural order. Expansion meant displacement. So people built a certain image around them. Not really dangerous and not bold, not intelligent in any meaningful way beyond basic survival. Just another animal existing in the background of a much larger ecosystem. Something you might hear at night, a distant howl carried across empty land, but rarely something you'd ever have to think about during the day. And that image stuck. Even as cities grew, even as roads cut through wilderness and neighborhoods replaced open land, most people assumed that coyotes would, just follow the same pattern as everything else. That they would retreat, shrink, or disappear entirely from areas that became too crowded or too loud or too unpredictable. Because that's what predators were supposed to do. They weren't supposed to adjust to us. They weren't supposed to learn how we live, and they definitely weren't supposed to move closer. But that assumption, the idea that coyotes just would stay in their place, was based on a version of the world that no longer existed. And once that world started to change, so did they. What changed everything wasn't something that coyotes did. It was something that we did. As cities expanded and populations grew, humans didn't just move into the new territory. We reshaped it. Forests were cleared, roads cut through open land, and entire ecosystems were broken apart and reorganized. And in the process, one of the most important pieces of that system started to disappear. Wolves. For decades, wolves were hunted, trapped, and pushed out of large parts of North America. In some regions, they were nearly wiped out entirely. To people at the time, it felt like progress. Wolves were seen as a threat to livestock, to safety, to expansion itself. Removing them meant fewer risks, fewer obstacles, and more control. But wolves weren't just another predator. They were a controlling force. They kept ecosystems balanced in ways that weren't fully understood at the time. They limited the movement of prey. They reshaped where animals could go and where they couldn't. And just as importantly, they kept other predators in check, including coyotes. When wolves disappeared, that pressure disappeared with them. Entire territories that were once controlled, defended, and enforced suddenly became open. And for the first time, coyotes weren't just surviving on the edges anymore. They had space. And they did what they've always done best. They adapted.
Okay, so this coyote, I took videos of him or her long ago. I thought just some random coyote with a broken leg that was hanging out at this gas station. 2 years later, I realized this coyote comes here and waits for people to give him food. I haven't seen him in 2 years, but it's the same exact one. And I went and talked to the gas station attendant, and he said, yeah, this coyote always just comes and waits to get food from people. And he has a broken leg. Crazy.
At first, the shift wasn't obvious. Coyotes were expanding outward, moving into areas they had previously avoided. They spread across regions where they had never been seen before, filling in gaps that had been left behind. To most people, it still didn't seem like a big deal. Coyotes were smaller, less aggressive, and easier to ignore. But what no one really accounted for was how flexible they were. Because coyotes don't need dominance to survive. They don't need to overpower everything around them. They just need opportunity. And that's exactly what we gave to them. We removed their biggest competitor, wolves, of course. We broke up the landscape. We created endless pockets of space, fragmented, unpredictable, constantly changing environments that most predators would struggle to navigate. But not coyotes, because while other predators depended on stability, coyotes were built for chaos. And as human expansion continued, as cities grew, and environments became more complex, more crowded, and more artificial, the conditions that should have pushed them out actually started to pull them in. Coyotes didn't just move into new environments. They changed the way they lived. And the changes weren't random. They were precise. One of the first things that shifted was when they moved. In the wild, coyotes can be active during the day or night. But in areas where humans are present, that pattern started to tighten. Activity shifted into the hours When people aren't paying attention, late at night, early morning, the quiet space between routines, not because they were forced to, but because it worked. They became invisible by adjusting their timing. Then came how they moved. Instead of open fields and wide terrain, coyotes began navigating streets, alleyways, drainage systems, fences, anything that provided cover and structure. They stopped moving like animals crossing territory and started moving like something that understood it, following the same routes, cutting through the same gaps, using the same blind spots over and over and over again, almost like they were mapping it. And then there's what they eat. Coyotes are opportunistic, but in human environments, that trait becomes something else entirely. Trash, rodents, pet food left outside, even small pets. Anything accessible becomes part of the equation. Not because they prefer it, but because it's efficient, relatable, predictable. And over time, that predictability starts to matter more than instinct. Because instinct doesn't adapt. Patterns do. And that's where the shift becomes harder to ignore. Coyotes don't just avoid humans, they study them. Not consciously, not the way that we understand it, but through repetition. Trial and error. They learn when streets are empty, when people walk their dogs, when noise drops, and they adjust accordingly. Not getting closer than necessary, but never leaving. But that balance, distance without absence, is what makes them so difficult to notice. They're not hiding in the way people imagine. They're just operating just outside the edge of attention. Always present, but rarely seen. Close enough to exist within human space, but controlled enough to never fully reveal themselves. And over time, that behavior starts to look less like survival and more like strategy. I mean, I'm from Texas. Some of y'all know that. Of course, I lived in Atlanta before moving here to Southeast Asia. And it's just amazing how many grown adults, I'm talking about millennials and older, have never actually seen a coyote. Unless you're a night owl like me, you know, they can be hard to see, late at night. But in America, as development is a bigger deal, commercial development, they're kind of getting pushed, in towards people. You're going to see more common occurrences during the day, which if you just go on TikTok, you can see coyotes, just in the daytime, just trotting around like nobody's business, right? I mean, it's just incredible. To me, the most unsettling part about all of this isn't that coyotes have adapted, it's how close they've gotten. Not to the edges of cities, not to outskirts when neighborhoods start to fade into open land, but inside them, like fully inside. I mean, there's videos of people literally having coyotes inside their home, which is insane. Moving through the same spaces people use every day, just at different times, under different conditions. Suburban neighborhoods and city parks, quiet residential streets, places that felt controlled and safe, that's where they are. In some areas, coyotes have become so integrated into these environments that sightings are no longer rare, which is crazy. The sightings are just brief, basically, right? A quick glimpse on a security camera, a shape crossing the street at night, something moving between houses and disappearing before anyone has time to react. And because those moments are so short, so easy to dismiss, most people don't think much of them. They assume it's unusual, but it's not. In cities across North America, coyotes are living entire lives within human environments without ever being consistently seen. They move through backyards, follow fence lines, cross intersections, and slip through parks that are filled with people during the day. And when morning comes, they're gone, back into whatever space they carved out for themselves, waiting for the cycle to repeat. And the strange part is how normal it starts to feel. People begin to accept the occasional sighting. A neighbor mentions seeing one. A post shows up online. Maybe someone catches a clip on their door camera. It becomes something people acknowledge, but they don't fully process because nothing obvious is happening. There's no constant presence or clear threat, just fragments. But listen, those fragments add up because what they point to isn't a rare event, it's a pattern. Coyotes aren't passing through those areas, they're operating within them. And once you start to look at it that way, The distance people assume exists between themselves and the wild starts to disappear. The idea that these animals belong somewhere else, that they're out there, removed from everyday life, doesn't really hold up anymore. Because they're not out there, they're here. And most of the time, they're a lot closer than anyone realizes. Most of the time, coyotes go unnoticed. But every once in a while, someone sees just a little bit too much. It usually starts the same way. Someone walking home at night. A quiet street, nothing unusual, nothing out of place. Then something moves in the distance. Not fast or aggressive, but just enough to catch your attention. And when they stop and look, they realize it's been sitting there longer than they thought. Watching, still, waiting to see what they'll do next. Sometimes it actually follows. Not closely, not in a way that feels like an immediate threat, but just for enough time to be behind, to stay out of reach, matching pace and keeping distance. Close enough to be there, but never close enough to force a reaction. And when the person finally turns around again, trying to get a better look, it's gone. Other times, it's less subtle. A homeowner checks their security cam in the morning and sees movement from the night before. A coyote crossing the yard, then another, moving along the same path, one after another, like they've done this before. No hesitation or confusion, just passing through like it's part of their routine. In some cases, it happens in broad daylight. A coyote walking down the sidewalk, crossing a street. I mean, it's crazy seeing them cross the street and it seems like they know the stoplights, they know stop signs. I mean, it's just incredible to watch. Pausing briefly before disappearing between houses. People see it and stop, unsure how to react. It doesn't behave the way we expect. It doesn't panic. It doesn't rush away. It just moves on, like it knows it doesn't need to. And that's what makes these encounters feel so different. It's not chaos or aggression. It's basically control. Even when people notice them, and when there's a moment of direct awareness, coyotes rarely break pattern. They don't overreact or expose themselves any longer than necessary. They move through the situation, adjust, and disappear again. And afterwards, there's always the same feeling. Not fear, really, but just a quiet realization that something was there the whole time. Just watching and moving and deciding long before we actually noticed it. And that for a brief moment, the distance between human space and wild space wasn't really there at all. If coyotes are this close to people, moving through neighborhoods and crossing streets, passing through backyards, then the obvious question is, why don't we see them more often? The answer isn't luck, it's design. Coyotes don't survive in human environments by being bold. They survive by being ninjas, right? Being precise. Everything about how they move is built around one idea: staying just outside the range of attention. Not invisible, but close enough to it that most people never register what's actually happening. They don't wander aimlessly. They don't take unnecessary risks. They operate on timing, distance, and awareness. Most of their movement happens during hours where human activity drops to its lowest point. Not just late at night, but during very specific windows. After the last lights go off, before the first routines begin. That narrow stretch of time when streets are empty, noise is minimal, and there's nothing to draw attention. And when they do move through active areas, they adjust. They hug the edges, fence lines, tree lines, the space between houses. They use shadows the way other animals use cover, moving along the boundaries of visibility rather than through the center of it. And when something changes, when a light turns on or a door opens or a car pulls in, they don't panic. They usually just pause and wait. They let the moment pass. That ability to stop and hold position is part of what makes them so hard to notice. Because people aren't looking for stillness, they're looking for movement. Something quick, obvious, and easy to identify. And when that doesn't happen, when whatever is there simply blends into the background, they move on without ever realizing they were that close to seeing it. Here in Southeast Asia, I'm in Vietnam and there's lots of rats here. It's a very ratty city. And, rats, when they notice there's human presence, they just scatter usually. They usually don't freeze, right? But they scatter kind of along the edges, just like coyotes do. But in America, for all my people that don't live in America, coyotes are weird because they're kind of like deer. Like if they think you spotted them, they'll just stand there. They'll just stand there and freeze, and they'll just run off when they think it's safe, right? A lot of times you didn't spot them, especially late at night. And a lot of times, if you just really look around, they're closer to you than you think. I mean, it's very, very strange how they move, but they're very methodical. Coyotes learn the patterns of a place the same way they learn about anything else, through repetition, when people are active and when they're not, where movement drowns attention and where it doesn't. And once those patterns are understood, they just don't need to take chances anymore. They just operate within them, which is why most people never ever see a coyote clearly. Again, I told you earlier that a lot of Americans have never actually set eyes on a coyote. Late at night, you kind of see them in the distance, you like see their silhouette. But a lot of people have never, I'm talking about grown people, have never seen one. At a certain point, this stops being a story about coyotes because what they're doing isn't unique to them. It's just easier to see. For a long time, people have operated under the assumption that nature exists in a separate space, that there's a clear line between human environments and everything else. And beyond that, somewhere out there is where animals belong. That idea feels true, but it ain't. Because nature doesn't recognize those boundaries. It doesn't retreat just because we build over it. It doesn't disappear when environments change. It just adjusts and reorganizes. It kind of finds a way to exist within whatever conditions are created. And sometimes those conditions don't push animals away. It pulls them in, just like I told you earlier. But coyotes are just one example of that. They didn't just fight against human expansion. They just didn't resist it. They just adapted. They learn how to move through it, which is just amazing to see animals able to adapt to us. As crazy as we are, we don't care. We just try to push animals out. We, try and destroy their habitats. And the animals are like, look, watch this. I'll just adapt to you. I'm not going anywhere. Even in the most structured environments, there are gaps, spaces between routines, moments where attention drops, places that aren't being watched as closely as we assumed. And those gaps are all that's needed. So the next time you're out at night, if you live in America especially, when you're walking down a quiet street, standing in your driveway, or looking out into the dark where the light doesn't quite reach, just remember, you're not the only one who knows how to move through that space. The difference is you expect to be seen and it doesn't.